Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Connolly from the Centre for Atmospheric Science. This semester I'll be your tutor in professional development. The aim of this semester is for you to learn how to write an effective or successful research proposal, and this week we'll start with some basics on research proposals. So week 1, getting started with research proposals. Here is a screenshot from the unit spec for the tutorials that the tutorial coordinator sent to me. This semester we're concerned with these things called intended learning outcomes, ILOs, and we're concerned with ILO 3, 4 and 6. So have a read of these. So you can see it's about planning the strategy for collecting data based on consideration of basically previous literature, frame of a research question relevant to an independent project, and to write a research proposal outlining a question to be addressed with background methods and so on. So these ILOs, these intended learning outcomes, give the basic summary of what it is we want you to learn or achieve this semester, and we'll go into proposal writing a little bit deeper during the tutorials. Throughout the tutorials you should plan each week to watch a very short video like this, and also do some reading and some small amount of work in between the tutorials to prepare yourself for the tutorial. In terms of assessment, so you had the assessment last semester, which was 50%. This semester's also 50%, and it's this report or individual research proposal. So it's an individual piece of work. You'll work on your research proposal throughout the semester, and it'll be due in week 10. So the length of these research proposals is a maximum of 1500 words. And you'll get feedback on your work throughout the tutorials. So some useful reading. Here is a great book. I've read it recently, and I'm going to work from this book, and I'll set you some reading sections from it. Although it's focused on research funding mainly for academics, mainly of the points in the book are relevant to writing generic, effective research proposals. And so I'll set you some sections to read from this book in various weeks, and hopefully you'll pick up some useful tips each week, which we'll consolidate by discussing in the synchronous sessions. So who writes proposals? And this is just from my experience, but we have academics within universities, people like me, people like your other lecturers. If we want to do research, we usually have to fund it, and for that we have to write a grant application to compete with other academics from other universities, usually for limited funds. Could also be postdoctoral students, so PhD students for instance. Usually these could be for travel or subsistence, so for example a visit to a conference or a visit to another research centre. When I was a PhD student, I wrote a short proposal to go and visit the National Centre for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado for a couple of months. It's a great place, and I really recommend it. And people there really encouraged me in my research at the time. But in order to go there, I had to apply for funds, and for that I had to write a research proposal. Undergraduate students, so this is you guys, you'll have to write a proposal, which is why we're here, but ultimately academics like me and your other lecturers, for instance, your project supervisors, they'll assess your research proposal, and usually as academics we want to prioritise working with students who can propose to do a good piece of research that we think is going to be successful and worthwhile. So you want to be able to write a good research proposal so you can have your first choice of supervisor for the project that you want to do. Postdoctoral researchers. So this can be a stepping stone between being a postdoctoral student and going on to be an academic in university or going on to do further work elsewhere. And perhaps postdoctoral researchers might have an opportunity to apply for access to facilities. So for example, beam time. When I was a postdoctoral researcher, I had to apply for access to a cloud chamber facility in Karlsruhe in Germany, and for that I had to write a research proposal in order to fund that trip. And successful bids for a postdoctoral researcher, if a postdoctoral researcher writes a research proposal and that's successful, then that can usually form part of a researcher's CV. So it's a worthwhile activity for a postdoctoral researcher if you want to go on and do other things. Another one is volunteer organisations. I volunteer for a local sports club, and usually sports clubs like this can apply for facility upgrades or equipment or etc. etc. And although this is a different situation, the applications, the proposals these volunteer organisations have to fill out have a lot of similarities to other proposals. There's also the private sector. I go for a run, running's my thing, I go for a run with a land developer, and he tells me that grants are available for developers, usually from the government, and these are available for them to improve an area in terms of the amenities within that area. So for example, Media City in Salford would not have happened without a successful proposal for a developer to work on that development. There's a huge difference in scale across all of these applications, but the principles are very similar. How are research proposals decided? Who decides on which proposals get funded and which proposals don't get funded, or which proposals can go ahead and which proposals can't go ahead? On the academic research funding side, then usually proposals that come in to apply for funds are sent out to referees for peer review. These may or may not be experts in that particular field, and these reports are then sent in and considered by a panel. So a panel meets to discuss the proposals, and each proposal has someone who gathers the referee reports together and presents a summary of that proposal to the panel for discussion. So that's one way. Another way is internal to the university, so it could be academics at the university, people like me, people like your other lecturers, and they usually sit on these research panels. They might have a role to sit on a panel to decide on research proposals. So they take a lot of that methodology and apply it to their decision making at universities. So they're looking for similar things. Other funding decisions are usually set up in a similar way. Now, what makes a good proposal? So this is from the research toolkit. So funders, decision makers, usually want to invest in the best research. Does the proposal offer a realistic promise of an answer to an important question? That's one thing we consider. And you can break this down into 4 key propositions. So we can break it down first of all into the importance proposition. Does the proposal, or does your proposal, ask an important question? Is the question important? So you need to get across the argument as to why the question you're asking is important. Secondly, we have the success proposition, and so here we're considering, is the project likely to answer this question? So what kind of things can you put in the proposal that convince the reader that you're likely to answer the question? Thirdly, we have the value proposition, and this is the likely gain from the project. Is it worth the resources that you need to complete the project? And although there's huge difference in scale between an undergraduate project and a project funded by a research council, you still require a resource to conduct your research. And finally, we have the competence proposition. Is the applicant competent to carry out the project? So what can you put in the proposal that convinces the reader that you're competent to carry out the project? So this comes back to your experience. What things have you done that can lead up to you being able to complete this project? Some other aspects from the research toolkit. Your proposal should be easy to read. So we'll cover some tips on how to make it easy to read or easy to speed read. It should be easy for a non-specialist to remember, so it should be memorable, should be able to understand it and be able to summarise it without having to go back and read it again. Should make it easy for readers to reconstruct the essence of your proposal and communicate how it meets the 4 key propositions that we discussed on the previous slide. And it should also provide an at-a-glance overview of your project to others, so we can understand, the readers can understand exactly what it is you're proposing. So we'll cover top tips on how to achieve this in the tutorials. So just to summarise here, you have the main points. You have to convince decision makers that your proposal is worth investigating. That's the key message. And there is usually some level of competition that you'll have to compete with for limited resources, even as undergraduate students. There are 4 key propositions that you'll need to consider. The importance: is the project important? Is the question important? The success: is it likely to be successful? The value: is it value for money, value for resource? And the competence: are you competent to complete this research? The proposal needs to be easy to read and remember. Okay, so during the tutorial, or even before the tutorial, I'd like you to have a look on the next page. I have some example topics of projects that I've supervised and others have supervised in the past. So I'd like you to choose one of those topics, and we're going to form breakout groups and discuss what you could write about the 4 key propositions if you were writing a proposal, a research proposal on one of these topics. And the topics are here. So if you can, before the tutorial, have a look at this, choose a topic that you think you might find interesting. If you have another idea, then feel free to propose another project, that's fine. And also, if you can do the reading recommended from my webpage prior to the tutorial. Okay, that's me. Thanks for listening.